I just have running shorts. I have no identification on. I walk through a graveyard. That's part of my 5.5-mile loop. I see somebody all dressed in white. They were not in first century garb, so it didn't totally capture me like, oh my gosh, that's an angel. They were dressed in normal clothes, but he was working on a grave, which probably has some symbolism I haven't figured out yet. His back is to me. He's all dressed in white, and he's kind of working on the grave and arranging things. I'm thinking, that's kind of weird. Why would you be all dressed in white, you know, working in the dirt? For the rest of that story, let's invite Scott Barr to come up, because Scott had an angle of that story that I didn't have. So let's give it up for Scott.
I'm a father of 3. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And also from a work standpoint, I've been in the ER setting for roughly about 11 years in some capacity. So most recently a nurse practitioner. And basically this part of the story where Kevin and my worlds collide, we had just crossed over the Thornapple River. We're going down Cascade, and it takes a little bend just about before 36th Street. And my wife and I see this guy adjacent to the running path there. And he's laying his back to the ground. His hands are above his head. And my wife says out loud what we're both thinking. And she's like, that just looks weird. And so I slow it up, and we're just looking at him, and I just get this pit in my stomach. And so we turn into the first drive there, and as soon as I open the door, I just can tell this guy's in crisis. He's pale, he's dusty gray, and so I start running over to him, and he's not responding. I search for a pulse, can't find anything, and so I just go into work mode, basically, starting CPR. And you know, through that whole time, I'm thinking, you know, how long has this guy been down? He needs oxygen. I don't have an ambu bag, and so out in the field, it's pretty basic, and so I just started giving mouth-to-mouth, which I've never done before. EMS showed up, they got him on the rig, and basically took him away, and these events come with about a 97% fatality risk. And then on top of that, you get something called an anoxic brain injury, where you know, brain cells start dying anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes, where you don't recover from that. Correlating, you know, right at Kevin's collapse within seconds to minutes, just really speaks to why we're here today.
So you can see the sequence. After everything went really wrong, everything had to go really right. And it is arguable that I've got my brain fully back. I don't think I ever really had it, but I have a great excuse. So if I ramble and stuff, I can just blame it on my cardiac arrest. But I'm super grateful. My first call to you was very emotional, because my kids were talk amongst yourselves. Yeah, I mean, you gave me a chance to be a dad again. Before he was doing his thing, and we've matched the story, and it fits together, it makes sense. My spirit left my body. I had a very surreal, complete out-of-body experience where I'm looking down at my body. I am now above it. There's nobody around. I don't know how long it took for that to happen. I'm not smart enough to figure that out. It's a mystery. We know that there was at least an 8-minute window between the call and when they thumped me and got a pulse, but how many minutes were before that? So it was probably anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, 10 on the short, 15 on the ladder. But I had a very distinct sensation of my spirit. So you're a trichotomy, right? You're a spirit that happens to live in a body that has a mind. And this spirit part of you, I explained it to my kids in the hospital with their mom right there. I said, your mom and I partnered to bring God's idea of you into being. But God already had an idea about you before mom and dad ever met. And they're kind of like, what? And I'm saying, well, Jeremiah 1:5 talks about this idea that God knew us before we were in the womb. We didn't exist before our parents got together, but God had a sparkling, luminous idea, a dream of who you were before you were even in your mother's womb. And he partnered with your parents to bring that idea into existence. So this part of me, this God particle, if you will, the part of me that God himself shared with me, just like he did with Adam in the garden, he just breathed life. It's this immortal part of you, floated up and over the ridge like you saw in the video, and that's where I met the person in white again, but this time he turned and the light was so brilliant. God help me with this. The light was so brilliant that I felt like it was light that had never seen darkness. And darkness had never touched it. It was blinding. but not painful. I could tell it was a masculine form, but I couldn't make out the features. But it was light, and then there was a tremendous amount of love, to the extent where I've never had this before and probably will never have this again until I slip into that next dimension again. But I've never been in a space or a place or with a person where there was a complete, undeniable lack of fear. There was no fear. Not anything. It was just all love. And in that moment, I felt like he belongs to me, I belong to him. We didn't have to spend a lot of time talking. In fact, his words were very sparse. Dave Sr. in the back, you know, maybe you can relate to some of this, but it was a very short dialogue, but I had this sense that, hey, I know this person. And people are like, how do you know it wasn't an angel? Well, usually when angels show up, like, people get really scared, right? You know, there's this 8-foot tall shaft of light gleaming like a glowing furnace, right? And the first thing the angel says is, fear not, fear not. But you don't walk to an angel saying, I want to worship you, I want to follow you. But when you come in contact with the living Christ, like the two on the road to Emmaus did after the resurrection, and you feel your heart warm and you feel your bones are on fire like the prophets of old, you begin to think that maybe I met the Son of God. Maybe that is the Messiah. And that was the after effect that I had of walking through this experience, a lot of light, a lot of love. And then I felt in that moment that if he chose to, and he didn't, and I don't understand how this works, he didn't pull me into himself, but had he have done that, I wouldn't be here. He would have become the gate. He would have become the way, the truth, the life. I had a very distinct feeling like I have to go through this guy to get to the other dimension. And it's not my actualized divine self. I have new age friends that are trying to convince me otherwise. I didn't die for my sins. I mean, that's such an ego trip. It was the living Christ that I believe I had seen. And he would have become the portal in that instance. And he just, instead of pulling me into himself, which if you've had people that have passed, that's what he's done. He just kind of turned ever so gently, almost like a leaf blowing in the wind. And his words came to me like a leaf in the wind. And they were very short and very succinct, but very to the point. It's not your time, period. Your mission is not yet complete. So I'd like to ask you a question before I have every head bowed and every eye closed. I'd like to ask you this question. Does your death scare you? And is your mission big enough that God might have to send you back to complete it? Or is he looking down the timeline of your life and saying, you know what, this guy is just going to live for himself. I might as well just take him home now. Now, I'm careful with this. There have been a lot more godly people that have gone way before we think they should have, right? You probably know people that are like this, and you're angry with God maybe still about that. I don't know how that all works out. What I do know is he sent me back because whatever I'm supposed to do, it's not done yet. And I think part of that is this night. So let's have every head bowed and every eye closed.